Okay, seems we're live. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are. Welcome back after the break. For this session, Alberto is going to talk about extreme context mapping, and Alberto will introduce himself in the talk. So I wish you all a lot of fun. And if you have questions, please use the chat or the Q&A function in Zoom or the chat on YouTube. I'll be monitoring it and help out with questions. So yeah. Please be so interactive as possible. Alberto, floor is yours.
Thank you. Yeah, good afternoon, good whatever, everybody. And yeah, welcome here. I don't see your faces. I have no visual feedback. Maybe I'm going to say something that is supposed to be funny, then it's not. And then it's going to be weird for online meetings. A little bit about me, if you, sorry. Yeah, I started and I still do coding. So the kind of old guy. I have a white beard here and well, gray, and into the dream design from a long time. Also, I'm running this company, Advanced Coperta. This is an interesting thing because it might be providing a safe playground for weird ideas without wasting my customers' money, or yeah, wasting only mine. And yeah, I used to do a lot of event storming in person with paper or sticky notes and all this stuff before the virus. Now it's a little bit more complicated than this, but yes, relevant, maybe yes, maybe not. It just helped in a few cases. While the final link at the bottom is already available also in the YouTube channel, there's a page where I might be sharing some writings in case of questions. I just need a flip chart, so yes, and it's going to be updated live. So yeah, just in case. So the main idea behind this this talk is I've been doing a lot of event storming, probably also too much of it. Like people were calling me to do the thing that I was doing better, maybe, but yeah, a lot of customers were asking me to do the same thing. And I was, hey, that's not the only thing I do. I like to practice something different. I like to drive, to stretch a little bit more what I'm doing to the extreme, or to try to eat my young dog food, well, to the end that I turn it into gourmet food or into something, yeah, really, really hard to eat. Whatever. That's a result of some experiment we run on ourselves. Yeah. And or yeah, maybe also on a few selected customers. So we've been working on our internal projects sometimes, and I am in the weird position of being the owner of the company, one of the person touching the code, domain-driven design explorer, and so well, there is no budget negotiation. We just try stuff. So let's get into the examples. In the talk, we're going to have something like 4 different recipes and variation about how to use context mapping and in unconventional ways. So let's start from the fundamental. If you never heard about context mapping, that's the basics. Like a bounded context is a unit of language consistency. Well, that's the idea of a context, a place where the language is guaranteed, no synonyms, it's consistent, everybody understands what we're talking about. When we get into software, when we need to protect also the boundaries, is the place where a given model could be applied. So it's an idea of consistency for our understanding, and this model is intended to be the best fit for a given purpose. Okay, that's a definition. The point is, why do I care so much about bounded context? Is because in my experience with software development, in many contexts, this is one of the worst possible mistake that we can do. So software development is a profession that is built upon mistakes. The whole idea of refactoring, or also domain-driven design, is designed for places where we cannot actually make the right decision up front. We start with the most plausible decision, and then we continuously improve. Still, some mistakes are easy. Renaming a class, well, easy, but mixing bounded context, oh, that's a different thing. Like I usually use this Lego metaphor. What's the time needed to mix two Lego boxes? Well, half a second. You just pour it on the table, on the floor. What's the time needed for separating things? That takes longer. Do it with 3, 4 boxes. The time for mixing is still manageable. The time for separating grows up exponentially. So the thing with bounded context becomes really, really important because they are hardly reversible mistakes. And also one of the drivers for that makes these mistakes hardly reversible is fear. The more we share with somebody else, the more we are afraid of breaking somebody else's code. This led me to the second characteristic for a bounded context is also a safe space, and safety is important because of this. I have no fear of changing things because I'm not breaking things except things which are under my control. And this creates a great space for learning domain complexity, experimenting with new approaches, new naming, new idea, new architectures. And in the end, what really matters for people like us, this virtual conference, delivering high value software. The underlying theme that is really important is it actually matches really, really well with different archetypes that comes from, well, brain science and motivation, which is the framework from Daniel Pink in the book Drive. And that video is just like way more effective than the book, just like 15 minutes that are gonna open your brain. But the 3 drivers is people are gonna do great things if they are having autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And wow, that for me, that's exactly what a bounded context is a unit of autonomy. I can implement the best model inside the bounded context. Unit of mastery, I have a team, we can do the best practices, we can do DDD, we can get event sourcing, we can get CQRS, we can get functional, we can apply the practices. And if this is wrong, well, gold plating is gonna be our gold plating, no problem. Unit of purpose, because this is a model which is tailored around a specific purpose, and also talking with a few selected people. And we understand the purpose of these people inside the organization. We implement the best model for them. We make them happy. Great job. I like the loop. I like the learning. That's exactly what writing good software should be about. Okay, second little distinction, just covering the basics. It's just like this is not in the books, but it's really relevant. So brownfield versus greenfield bounded context. If you talk about brownfield, what we're looking at is detecting natural existing boundaries, which are made up politics inside the organization, maybe logistic, distribution, mergers and acquisition, a team of external consultants versus a team of internal developers, historical region, and so on. What we're doing is mostly trying to detect which are the existing collaboration pattern and trying to detect if this is a good ground for good software development or if there are impediments at this level. Greenfield bounded context mapping is a different thing. It's just like we haven't developed our piece of software yet, or maybe we have to. Sometimes we start completely greenfield, like in a startup. Sometimes we are rewriting the legacy. But what we are looking at is how the software should be decomposed in some way. Which are the natural models? We are trying to design the perfect organization, looking for a single purpose of one model. And what we are trying to do is exactly trying to avoid expensive mistakes. This separation was not really clear at the very beginning of domain-driven design. It's something that we ended up refining along the way. So I think it's important to have it on the table. Okay, now let's get into the different recipes that we ended up applying in different contexts. This is not exactly new. I started talking about it a while ago, or maybe 5, 6 years ago, but it was something like a little side topic. So then I kept using it a lot more. I'm going to give you a few examples about what I mean for the 3 archetypes. It just there are some models which looking at the data level, something like exactly the same. While if you look at the behavior, they might be different. Let's take an e-commerce. In an e-commerce, so one of the most typical interaction is you start with a shopping cart. You add item, remove items, the price of the shopping cart, the total of the shopping cart changes accordingly. Then at a given moment, you want to transform the shopping cart into an order. And that's probably one of the best legacies of Amazon. Is just like they institutionalize this pattern because the shopping cart and the order, they have pretty much the same data, but the semantic is different. The object is different. And of course, the operation are different. You don't add and remove items from the order. Well, maybe you do, but it's a different thing because you already placed the order. While in the shopping cart, that's essentially a place where you can put and take things out, even if the data structure is the same. Another look about something very similar from a more old-fashioned domain, which is the insurance. Well, the contract is something that in negotiation is something that you can, where you can add coverages, add discounts, add extra clauses, and everything has a price. And then the same contract, usually with a little flag somewhere, contract sign equals true, is what makes a contract executable. If you crash your car, well, you look exactly at what you put on the contract sign. It also, that data becomes read-only. Then the third column is just like, of course, you're going to look about how many contracts we sold, how many, what is the average price for them, and so on. In a training organization like ours, there's a lot of content design about describing what might be perfect training and designing also the content, the envelope, and the content. And then the same content will be published on the website, basically being read-only. And then we're going to have business metrics in sales, in execution, in quality, and so on. So a picture is a lot more memorable. And these are the three archetypes in action. The main pattern is roughly the same data. What you have in the draft, the cart, the unsigned contract need to be exactly what may be enriched, but basically the same thing, what they put in the execution phase, and then it's going to be collected in some metrics later on. This red thing in the middle is what I call the validation barrier. If the contract is not ready to be signed, you cannot make it executable. You might need the signature, you might need some extra information, I can't finalize it. But this means like there is a model on the left, which is partially specified, temporarily inconsistent, with possibly a lot of conversation to make it good, and then the same data is going to be used in another model. Most of the monolithic software, it just uses a status flag and a lot of behavior in these places. I am really trying to keep them separated because it helps. So the pattern is, once again, roughly the same data structure, a key transition event, card checked out, contract signed. There's a moment which make it good for the next step, and the behavior is completely different. What was allowed before the transition event is no more allowed later on. You fix the price, you sign the contract, you don't add stuff. And so do we need to have the same model, behavioral model in between? Well, maybe we don't. And so really feels like, okay, that's something that is usually commonly applied by people that start data first, and while you start behavior first, you have similar things that are not exactly the same thing. We just had a conversation last week with a customer, and a lot of people were data-driven. Oh yes, we just have a flag. The result of that state flag is just like basically you have a shared system between the two different models, which is a kind of a violation of the definition of bounded context. Usually on the core class, it becomes a God class right here with all the methods for the left-hand behavior and all the methods for the right-hand behavior conflated together, which usually leads to fear. I have to make a change, but then if I change it, I might break existing contracts, blah, 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 and all the problems that you see later on. This is basically one of the most common problems in legacy software, and it's so repeatable. Enforcing the separation here, I could be more aggressive in building a specialized model for the left, because the only thing that I have to do on the left is whatever is the way to get to a data structure which is compatible to the model on to the right. I'm fine. So I can have a lot more technological decoupling. I can move computation somewhere else. I can go with a more specialized model and so on. And I could be more refined for this. Just like it's still one of the biggest sources of coupling in our code base. And this is still happening even if companies are moving to microservices, just to name one. One of the nice things about looking at this is this pattern is really pervasive, and I just added a line at the bottom of the examples, is that's exactly what we're doing when we're talking about software development. Our source code is a partially specified state of our artifact. If all the code, the code compiles, if the tests are green, maybe we could turn it into an executable, assuming that everything is working. And then the third model is what we do with monitoring. Is exactly the same pattern. We are doing pair programming and more programming on the source code. The executable code is running on one or more servers, and then we are looking at the outcome. The interaction that we are having with the model are different. And what we're doing as software developers with our process, I think, is a pretty good accelerated example of what could happen in other contexts. Just to make you worried, I think that's exactly what happens in the lawmaking field. And that's interesting because basically it's called code of laws. So what we have is a source code which is executable in the real world. People, lawmakers are writing laws. I'm kind of worried about what is the model for writing laws, because it looks like it's exactly the same model they're using for having the laws executable. I'm also worried about test environment and other concerns, and sometimes also analytics. But yeah, just something to make you scared about. Getting back to our flow. This is more or less the archetype that I'm looking at. I have to the left an optimized space for the needed interaction, a place at the center, which is usually should be developing TDD, well, pretty good task coverage. I'm expecting machinery here. I'm expecting something fuzzier to the left. And then metrics. Maybe I don't even need behavioral data, just collecting data, make them visible, easy to read for the experts that are making decisions based upon this data. How often do I use this archetype to read about the context? I would say always now. Just like I try to see if it fits anyway, and most of the time I end up making the cut, but not always. There are places where okay, I can see the difference, but there is not a very precise moment where the draft and the execution, if things are evolving on a rolling basis, maybe this separation could make things more complicated. But let's say I give it a try. I try to see if the two models are different. If the people working with these models are different, maybe it's a good indicator. Okay, that was tool number one. Yeah, it's so for recipe. That was the first one. I don't know if there are questions already.
Alberto?
Yes.
There's one question on YouTube from James, and it's about the draft pattern. What if the non-draft model does have lots of extra behavior? So now we are enforcing special invariants in this other model?
Usually the invariants are different. So it might be so simple to be just a form. I mean, the simplest form of a draft model is a form with validation on the client side of something. But if let's say the cart is long living, well, then it becomes server side, and then it needs to be there. But usually there's a lot of structural validation in the model on the left, and then there is execution consistency in the model to the right. It's just a different type of interaction, also different style of programming, which is really, yeah, a lot dependent on the domain. But what I observe is the patterns, the coding patterns that I use on the left side are not the same that I use on the right side. So a model which is general purpose becomes really, really complicated, while focusing on how to make the best possible structure. Yes, that's what I do. How to make it run here, okay, that's a different thing. And I don't need to have a model which is able to do two things. And most of the time, this is already simplifying things a lot.
Okay, thank you. I have no other questions, so carry on. Okay,
cool. Second weird idea is bounded context on a grid. So this is coming from something that we've done on our company. Okay, my company is really small. I make it sound like a company, like a big one. No, it's small. It's just like 5 people, 20 partners around. But we have no single focus. We actually have many business lines. Since we are few people and many business lines, you cannot really look at, oh, head of department. You cannot look at titles to establish a structure, because it's 5 people doing a lot of stuff. Other weird thing, we use even storming on ourselves a lot, but not on everything. Like some business line are too young. We're actually redesigning some due to the virus spread. And we would like, of course, to write some software about it. So looking at the bounded context, we actually bumped into this type of weird situation. Like one of the things that our company is organizing trainings, we also do consulting. We do meetups and other on-site private classes and other things. But yes, it's training a bounded context. We ended up having a list like this, like trainings, planning, consulting, webinars. Let me get back to here. It was too fast. Shit, it was too fast again. Like planning is a bounded context probably, but training and consulting, are they bounded context? Yes or no, because they might have a planning inside. I mean, there's building inside training, which is similar, but not exactly the same to the building inside consulting. But yeah, in the context of training or in the context of consulting, things were different. And I really felt like after a while, well, we are comparing apples and oranges, so we need a different approach. If anybody felt the same pain in some moment, that's where we are. So the idea was, okay, let's start from a different structure. Let's start visualizing the business line first, and maybe be strict about them. And also, having done quite a few even storming, I know that they go from left to right. And so public trainings, private trainings, similar but not the same. Consulting, yeah, similar but not the same. Public speaking also, managing sponsorship. Sponsorship is a business line. Yes, it has execution, it has no revenues, but it has some value somewhere. Then also software delivery, organizing meetups, organizing events, writing and commercializing books. Okay, 9 business lines for more or less 5, 6 people. Okay, that's already messy, but at least it's horizontal and nice color. On top of this, we put phases. We put what were the kind of usual separation that we had in an end-to-end visualization of the whole flow. So for every line, we might have strategy at the beginning, product design, planning, sales, delivery, billing, financial analysis. It's just a rough. I just needed to have a grid somewhere. And also, yeah, warning, the order might change in different lines. Like in public trainings, the planning is actually happening before the sales. In consulting, goes the other way around. We sell the consulting and then we fix the date. So it might not be strict, expect some fuzziness. Things get interesting when you start visualizing bounded context on top of this grid. So we could see here like we're having deal with trainers, which might be encompassing public and private trainings. We have a collaborative content design with some of them. We might have, we need the model for pricing, looking comparative prices in other nations and finding the best combination for us and so on. And I'm not going to explore the whole line, but it's interesting to see a few things. One is the size of a different model. Some models are really, really specialized and are valid only inside a given bounded context. So I have engagement strategy, contracts and engagement, which are similar for software delivery and consulting, but are not the same. Personal availability for planning is a common theme for everything that involves, traveling, which now is something which is so old-fashioned. But also you can see the really big bubbles. Billing is almost everywhere, except in the business lines which are not delivering revenues. Global analysis is for everybody. Marketing, travel, and logistics is mostly for everything too. So that's kind of interesting. And that was, actually this slide was before we started doing online training. So the video coverage is also should be moving up to another scenario. So in general, it just made the whole boundary definition a lot easier. Like the problem was mostly in my brain. I was trying to separate. I knew that there was consulting and training inside the same application, then they needed to have a separation. And I thought like, okay, my only separation is bounded context, so I have to apply it. And then, well, actually not. Just like business line are one thing, inside the business line, I may have different configuration for bounded context. Some of them are going to be common, general. Some of them are going to be shared between 2 or 3. And okay, I have a little bit more specific structure. Yeah, from the need of a directory tree to, okay, now I can see what this bounded context means. Interestingly, if we zoom into a single business line, it's the bounded context inside this business line. They're just representing the step for a value creation network. And just like we fix the deal, we pick the date, we adjust the pricing, we do the sales, we do the delivery, and including the certificate generation, do the billing, and then we see if the thing is just working. It just like, it's unconventional. It helped us. And okay, I have one more tool in my toolbox. Do we have any question on this one?
So up to now, I don't have any questions. So let's continue.
Okay, good. Recipe number 3 is bounded context on a stack. Subtitle: too much domain expertise can be a problem. So I have a new scenario here, which is, well, it's actually something repeated, but was working with a larger and more mature organization, and the trait was we are building sophisticated services on top of in-house technology, and the in-house technology was supposed to become a platform for more sophisticated services. Kind of obvious in some ways. So small context map in here, just like that's clearly not everything, but we have some sophisticated infrastructure. We had core services that could be already monetized, and we had high-value services that could be monetized more for more specific customer. And one more detail here. I'm visualizing bandwidth as thickness in the connection between bounded context here. The collaboration was really, easy, because everybody was, in proximity of the other team. All the teams were friendly, and there was a lot of space for conversation. Still, there was something that was not really working. Like high-value services were locked in using the services provided by the core. And this meant like knowing all the complexity that was exposed by the core services. What we ended up discussing is just like, I brought something that was not really original. I just say like, well, come on, this is a stack. It's just like, there's a solution for this, which is more or less, yeah, by the book. It's just like, I mean, in the book, we were talking about having an external model using the anti-corruption layer, and then we could have our bounded context for the high-value services built on top of what was happening here. But I made it explicit, like we need translation here. The thing that was interesting was it was hard to accept the need for a translation. So I was using in the example, like that's what you do when you have an external model, but well, we are not an external model, we are your friends. You just need to get familiar with our API. So we needed to be a little bit more explicit in this case, because what we were actually in need of was having a double layer of APIs. So one of the problems is linguistic. It's just like, we already developed the APIs. Well, the APIs that you develop, API is such a generic term. The APIs that somebody developed might not be the API I need. If developing API has a political connotation, oh, that was a big initiative. We spent the last year developing APIs. You don't want to redo APIs because you already have them. So sunken cost fallacy jumps in, and it doesn't really work. In this scenario, I would like to have a bounded context expressed in the cleanest, simplest possible language. I need to have a client-friendly API instead of the API I am provided. I have no problem with the API I'm provided. It is provided to be general purpose. I am not general purpose. So it's, I would say, my responsibility or my team responsibility to translate what is general purpose into something that is needed by me. The fact that friends are offering me something doesn't mean that I have to use it as is. So that's kind of important. And one of the important concepts to make it visible is just like APIs are generic, something are server friendly might not be the one we need, and something are client friendly. And this composition logic might actually be really complicated. We want to use it and cage it in a box in our anti-corruption layer for the moment, and eventually later, it might be important for somebody else. So why, to me, this looked like kind of obvious. The double layer for services, it was in the blue book from the beginning. So it really felt like a simple truth, really hard to accept. So one of the trap is yeah, the naming APIs. So if everybody was calling that, we already have some APIs. APIs are just whatever, just like saying code, and doesn't mean that the APIs we have are the APIs we need. And then if this information goes to the wrong type of boss, you get into the sunken cost reaction. Am I paying twice for the same thing? We already spent a lot of time developing APIs. And of course, it might be more complicated if consultants are involved under real contract, and so you know how things can go bad in this area. But the naming trap is there. The second trap has to do with expertise. So the knowledge of the domain of the core complexity of the system was already in the company. The people developing the API server side really knew the domain very much. And this is usually a compliment, and it still is. The problem is, if you are too much of an expert, it's going to be really, really hard for you to unlearn what you know in order to make an API which is completely client-friendly. I mean, mechanics are not car designers. I mean, if you need to get your hands dirty to start an engine, maybe that's not what we need to do. But it was the thing that was really, really interesting was the more expert the people were, the harder it was for them to see their problem from the outside, because they had never been outside in the last years. So that is probably most intriguing finding here. The solution is literally by the book, nothing new here, but the problem was in the human side. The little trick that we played in this scenario was actually a lot more in the linguistic and in the using words. So I hammered on the concept of fairy tale programming. Like my definition is, I would like to code against the system I wish I had. And I would like to design my APIs according to my needs without caring a lot about the legacy. I will need to plug my needs to the legacy. This is going to happen, but I don't want to have the availability of something constraining too much my design. And this implementation for the mapping will fit into the anti-corruption layer. And the goal of this approach is to maximize ignorance about the underlying complexity. I want not to know what is happening inside under the hood. Yes, maximizing ignorance, exactly, that is the goal. If everybody needs to know the complexity of an engine in order to use a car, oh, then we are screwed up. And it's really a matter of complete the workup encapsulation yes, just box all the wisdom that's already in there, and people are glad to help you, glad to explain you, glad to teach you how an engine is working because they are passionate and they like the job, but that's not the thing that I need to learn. So wrap the engine inside the car, just like the car, go to the shopping mall, whatever. So that was the weird thing. Do we have a question?
So not yet about this block, but there came a question about the previous one. So do context on a grid, so the business lines also work on brownfields?
Oh yeah, yeah. It's just, at the end, it's just a way to provide more organization, more structure on top of your context map. They're not placed randomly. Think about having a layer, putting things on a grid, snapping them on something, and then, okay, you achieve a little bit more of clarity, and yeah, also better naming for your directories and then packages in the project.
Okay, so we have about 8 minutes left, so I will propose that you do the last block, and then if we have time, we can do the other questions.
Cool. That's the last one, and also probably the most juicy one. Customer journey. And so I have this common problem in here. Like it might be a payment system, it might be something different. The story might be like I would like to send money to somebody else, and of course we know the complexity of this domain. This is kind of similar to something that I modeled in the last DDD Europe, but we know there's a lot of extra check to do something. The complexity is really deep, but the user doesn't want to know this all of this complexity. So the customer, the user, would like to have a button saying like send money, and to have the money received by them friend, and maybe have a notification like everything was all right. The problem here is once again in linguistic space. So I would like to have the visual element aligned with the user mental model, send money to the friend, even swipe. The call to action, the label on the button, is designed to be catchy. What happens under the hood is something a lot more sophisticated. Like one way to call it might be initiate payment process, start payment process, issue payment request, whatever. And in many places at the smaller level, if you look at commands and events, there are symmetries like calculate fee calculated, send message sent. We would like to have the same symmetry, but it not really working when we deal with user-initiated action, especially if they are external users like customers. The solution we started working about is to make one more language visible on the table. So the thing is, when we do context mapping, it's very easy to talk with people in the authorization department, in the fraud detection department, in the money transfer expert, and then, well, notification doesn't need the department, I hope, but it's still somebody's responsibility. And you talk with these people, and you understand that these people needs are different, and you create a bubble around their language so that the language is consistent. Unfortunately, sometimes you don't talk with the customer, or you don't really consider the customer to have a very different and independent language from the other one, mostly because you're trying to keep that language as close as possible to selected portions of the different languages. I don't know what's the correct name for this language, so I use the customer journey as a proxy. It's actually the only place where you can use a customer-centered language. Maybe not the only place, but yeah, the most famous one. So the problem is, once again, is in our brains. Like the domain-driven design expert tend to do this mistake. Like, I understand these domain complexities, 4 different languages in a row, and now everybody else should understand that we have those different languages that could be more precise and expose this bounded context to the world. The problem is, the world doesn't really care. The world doesn't really want to know about internal bounded context of your company as long as the software works. Once again, kind of similar to the Fairyland idea, while the customer would like to be in a place where the language is consistent, flat, and just works for them. The world doesn't care about your bounded context. So, well, a picture can be worth 1,000 words. This is the picture that I had in mind. So there is a customer language which has overlapping terms, mostly with a very similar meaning with all the other business dependent bounded context, department dependent or whatever. There might be terms which are in common with many of them. And the other important thing is the customer language is flat. Customer language doesn't need to understand that this language is, nested, has namespaces. No, it usually is a design language. The information architects are actually many times designing this language, picking up terms from the different departments, and we could have overlappings, we could have translation, but the dynamics of these languages are different. The customer language is dependent from what happens on the customer side, different tribes, different nation, and all, many different things. And the back-end bounded contexts are changing because of mergers and acquisition, different people coming from different university, evolution, new orientation, new companies, consultant, and so on. So that's the language on the top is flattened, simplified throughout the whole experience. Local languages have a deeper understanding of the complexity. Some terms are obviously the same, some might be different, but the main concern for me is there's one more language people don't really care about, and we think that we are talking about the same thing, like, I want to buy a ticket, the customer bought a ticket, but we might not mean exactly the same thing. Okay, so I started using this customer journey as a bounded context in a few places to understand, like, okay, no, this thing is separated. Sometimes it's bringing me extra complexity. Sometimes this is just saying, like, okay, now I can see some redundancy, but at least I have clarity inside every bubble. This language is designed, this language is flat, and most of the time we don't have a first-hand contact with the stakeholders because the customers, many times we cannot talk with them, or there are millions of customers, the language might be not even consistent sometimes, while it's easier, it used to be easier to have a conversation with real stakeholders inside departments. So yes, the thing that was interesting for me is, I'm drawing a context map. I'm using also even storming was leading us sometimes in this trap if we were not including the customer in this discussion. we using departments and company organization as a proxy for the bounded context, and it worked, except that kept one portion of the languages outside. I think in many cases, we might want to include this, this portion to be part of our discussion or our understanding of the problem. That was recipe number 4. And so I guess this is the beginning of the official question time.
Yeah, so we have a few questions, but we're also out of time. So I'd like to suggest to move this to either the Slack channel or on Twitter online, because we need to make room for the next session. I will make sure that the questions will pass through. Alberto, very much thanks for your presentation. Very interesting talk. And
thank you. Let me start
thanks.
sharing.
I will stop this session and we'll continue in 15 minutes with remote DDD training.